What's up, guys? This is Chris from draftdashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, August 17th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 14-game slate tonight. The picks were great yesterday, so congratulations to anyone who followed along with those. Let's see if we can hit it out of the park again today. Let's take a look at the pitcher position. I'm not going to mess around here. There's a bunch of good value on this slate. So I like Corbin Burnes with an 8% pitching advantage over the St. Louis Cardinals. Corbin Burnes pitches his best ball versus righty batters, only giving up a .462 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 7 righties here tonight. Now on top of that, the Cardinals have only hit 17 of his last 67 pitches. That's a .254 batting average. He's $11,500 FanDuel salary, and he's $1,300 less on DraftKings. He has an ERA of 2.23. His record is 7-4 on the season, pitching an average of 93 pitches per game, averaging 44 fantasy points per game. He scored 79, 37, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks this is going to be a low-scoring game. Only 7 runs scored in this game. That's the over-under. So I am a little bit concerned that he scored 79 fantasy points last game. Oftentimes, fantasy players have a letdown game after a monster game like that. But the splits are fantastic, and he's in a great spot. So I like Corbin Burnes here versus the St. Louis Cardinals. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Shohei Ohtani with a 37% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Casey Mize. Shohei Ohtani is batting 8% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .847 OPS versus righties. And Casey Mize, he pitches 29% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .849 OPS versus lefties. Shohei Ohtani is 1 for 3 with a 1.666 OPS versus Mize because that one hit was for a home run. He's $4,500 FanDuel salary, $2,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 11 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 6, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Shohei Ohtani here versus Casey Mize. Now I also like Joey Votto with a 34% batting advantage over Kyle Hendricks. Joey Votto is batting 26% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .947 OPS versus righties. And Kyle Hendricks, he's throwing 7% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .781 OPS versus lefties. So he throws his worst ball versus lefty batters. And Joey Votto is 13 for 34, batting a .382 batting average and a 1.393 OPS versus Hendricks. 4 of those hits are for home runs, then he has 3 doubles in there. So that's why I like this pick. He's got excellent batter versus pitcher history. He's $4,100 FanDuel salary, $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 19, 3, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Joey Votto here versus Kyle Hendricks. Now I also like Yuli Gurriel with a 50% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Daniel Lynch. Yuli Gurriel is batting 25% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .923 OPS versus lefties. And Daniel Lynch, he's pitching 25% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .821 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Lynch yet, and Yuli Gurriel is $3,100 FanDuel salary. He's $2,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Yuli Gurriel here versus Daniel Lynch. Oh, and Vegas thinks that's going to be a high-scoring game. 10 runs scored in that game. So I like the splits, and I like the high-scoring game, and I like his price on FanDuel.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, I also like Jared Walsh with a 64% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Casey Mize. Jared Walsh is batting 35% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.012 OPS versus righties. We know Casey Mize throws 29% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .849 OPS versus lefties. And Jared Walsh is 2 for 2 with a 3.5 OPS versus Mize. One of those 2 hits is a home run. And he's only $3,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 0, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Jared Walsh here versus Casey Mize. Okay, here's somewhat of a value play for you. I like Connor Joe with a 34% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Matt Strahm. Connor Joe is batting 8% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .925 OPS versus lefties. And Matt Strahm, he's pitching his worst ball versus righty batters. 27% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .996 OPS versus righties. So there's no at-bats versus Strahm yet, but the splits are fantastic. And Connor Joe is only $2,900 FanDuel salary, and he's $100 less on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites, projected at 10.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 25, 6, and 3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Connor Joe here versus Matt Strahm. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Luis Arraez with a 3% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Eli Morgan. Luis Arraez, he's batting 26% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .823 OPS versus righties. And Eli Morgan is giving up a .722 OPS versus lefties. Now, I like this pick because Luis Arraez is only $2,400 FanDuel salary, only $400 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 3, and 35 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game, so I like Luis Arraez as a value play here versus Eli Morgan. Okay, another value play. Take a look at Yanni Hernandez with a 49% batting advantage over Tyler Anderson. Yanni Hernandez is batting 17% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .749 OPS versus lefties. And Tyler Anderson, he pitches his worst ball by far to switch hitters. 31% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.022 OPS versus switch hitters. Now, Yanni Hernandez is 0 for 3 versus Anderson, but the splits are good, and he's only $2,200 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. He's projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22, 18, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Yanni Hernandez here versus Tyler Anderson. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Josh Donaldson with a 36% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Eli Morgan. Josh Donaldson, he's batting 13% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .845 OPS versus righties. And Eli Morgan, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 23% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .936 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Morgan yet, and Josh Donaldson is $3,000 FanDuel salary, $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 20, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Josh Donaldson here versus Eli Morgan. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I like Trevor Story with a 48% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Matt Strahan. Trevor Story is batting 21% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .978 OPS versus lefties. And Matt Strahan, he's pitching his worst ball versus righty batters, 27% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .996 OPS versus righties. Now, Trevor Story is 3 for 7, batting a .429 batting average and a 1.858 OPS versus Strahan, and 2 of those 3 hits are for home runs, and the other one's a double. He's $4,000 FanDuel salary, $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 3, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Trevor Story here versus Matt Strahan. Now I also like Corey Seager with a 31% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Will Crow. Corey Seager is batting 12% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .891 OPS versus righties. And Will Crow, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 19% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.290 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Crow yet, and Corey Seager is $3,200 FanDuel salary. He's $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 12, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Corey Seager here versus Will Crow. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Rafael Ortega with a 65% batting advantage over Vladimir Gutierrez. Rafael Ortega is batting 71% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .989 OPS versus righties. And Vladimir Gutierrez, he's giving up a .747 OPS versus lefties. Now, Rafael Ortega is 2 for 4 with a 1.350 OPS versus Gutierrez. And he's 3,100 FanDuel salary. He's 300 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight. Now, he's only averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 0, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games. But the splits are good, and he has good batter versus pitcher history. Granted, it is a small sample size, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. So I like Rafael Ortega here versus Vladimir Gutierrez.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.